Hi, kids of all ages. It's me, Aaron, here at Casa again, and I'm just here talking about your pieces once they're done, once you finish creating them, how to take care of them and how to be mindful of the drying process of your wares. So this is one I have. I've got all three of ours that we made yesterday. So this is the next day. So you can see, if you look at the color differentiation, the difference in color, this is kind of lighter here and lighter here and lighter here, and then it's more wet and darker. So the darker areas are the wetter areas, and that's when clay is kind of like halfway dry, it's called leather hard, and that's because it's kind of like the stiffness of leather. And so you want to think about, you don't want it to dry out too quickly. So obviously the parts that are going to dry the quickest are the really thin detail parts, the parts where there is more air getting at them. So the parts that are sticking out, protruding from the main body of your wares, that's what's going to dry first. So you can just let most of it dry naturally to the air, and you can just take a little bit of plastic. You can either use a grocery bag, any kind of Ziploc bag, whatever you have around the house. Dry cleaner bags work well. This is painter's poly. And you can just wrap it and get a little bit of tape and wrap the parts that you think will dry first, and that's the parts that are really detailed. Be careful on things like this little piggy tail here. It's already bone dry. So once it's bone dry, it's really delicate. I can't stress that enough. So, and when your whole ware is dry, it's basically like dried dirt, like bonded dirt. So it's silica or sand. You can think of a sand dollar at the beach that you might find at the ocean. They're very delicate when they're dry. And the same goes for your wares once they're bone dry. So when they're leather hard, that's the strongest stage. When you're making your slab and coil and pinch pot up to this point, though each of those projects, they're going to be very soft when you first make them because they're fresh clay. But now one day later, they're all leather hard and they're going to hold their shape. So everything's quite stiff. They're getting more delicate once they reach past the leather hard stage. And so yeah, I just wanted to talk about plastic. I mentioned you can use a grocery bag or a Ziploc bag or a dry cleaner bag. It all depends on how big of what you've made and what you want to cover up. You just get an appropriate size piece of plastic. The slower you dry your stuff, the better, because clay drying is a slow process, meaning there's less chance that things are going to separate and crack. If you do have some cracking, you can repair it with vinegar. Vinegar is acidic, which just means it sort of eats away at the clay. So you could take a little brush and you could paint a cracked area, and with some of the leftover clay that you have from your projects, because we gave you lots of clay to work with for these, I'm sure you have a little bit left over in your bag, in your little Ziploc bag, and use some of that clay, and you can combine the vinegar and the clay together and create what's called slip, which is that little slippery clay, and you can fill in the cracks with that slippery, vinegary kind of clay. So you actually would get a brush. I don't have a brush here, Andy, but you'd get a brush, just dip it in some vinegar, or put a little bit of vinegar in a little dish and then just paint it on the cracked areas if you have any cracks. And that's usually you're going to have to repair cracks on the second day. So you don't usually get vinegar involved when you first make something, because you don't usually notice where the cracks are going to occur until they actually occur, and that's usually the next day. So that's vinegar. Yeah. And finally, when you have freshly made something, let's pretend this was just made, this coil vessel. So I'm going to wrap it in some plastic because I want it to dry gradually. So this is, and be careful because when you first make it, it's going to be fairly soft. I have quite a bit of plastic here. And then if you have a wooden board around the house, If you don't, you could use a plate, I guess, in your house, something that will just hold your, because you got to transport it, you got to move it from one place to another in your house. So you just set that on there. If there's plastic underneath, you just set the project right on the wear board. Optional as well is to not use plastic at all if you don't have any handy or you don't want to use plastic. If it's basically all about the same thickness, it's going to probably dry at the same rate. It's things like this are the problem. This is not the same thickness as the rest of the pinch pot. The pinch pot is a big, massive ball of clay that we bonded together. And then this little tail is already dry, and so is the horn for the unicorn horn. And yeah, so that you want to cover those with plastic when they stick out, I mentioned. But this, you could actually just take, because I made it all about the same thickness, I like to put a little piece of newspaper on the wear board and then set it on there. And the projects I made yesterday, they dried really nicely. We didn't have any cracking issues on any of our participants. It all worked out really well. You can see the panning video to show all the projects that everyone made. So they were all completely uncovered, sat in our Casa clay classroom here overnight, and we didn't wrap any in plastic, and we got lucky. But sometimes you don't get lucky, so yeah, because it all depends on the type of dryness in the air, the moisture of your house, if you have a humidifier going. There's lots of factors. So we are taking calls here. We're staffing the building between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Monday to Friday. So if you did have any questions, or I'd be willing to take any of your questions or concerns about clay through my email, which is number 3, so 3dtech@artslethbridge.org, and I'd be happy to correspond with you from your home. Okay, so I hope you had fun making these wonderful clay projects, and yeah, keep the art going, guys. See ya.